Hi, I'm Jayreid. I'm a psychotherapist in San Francisco, California. And today I'd like to talk about finding a place for cast off parts of yourself after narcissistic abuse. In essence, I'd like to address the process of finding, staying in contact with, and eventually making friends with parts of yourself that have needed to feel forbidden within yourself in order to survive narcissistic abuse. And I'd like to start with just a quick example that will kind of help to illustrate this point throughout today's videos. So first, to start with, again, this anonymized kind of composite example of a fictional client I'll call James, who, in understanding and coming to understand his history, kind of concluded that, he's in essence a good kid, born to a narcissistic mother who is very forward in her kind of ways of insisting she was superior and James was inferior to her, and a narcissistic father who is a little less overt in his ways of kind of creating that dynamic of him being superior and others, in this case James, being the inferior ones. But nonetheless, his father seemed to have a narcissistic organization within himself. And so in a family with very little empathy or protectiveness, James seemed to possess both these traits in droves, and that quality of his seemed to also have made him a target for his parents, where every time his family convened in regular day-to-day life, it was always a matter of when, not if, James would get focused on, a flaw in him or his behavior found, and then the family would collectively and mercilessly harangue him, harass him, criticize him for this supposed flaw. It might be not having the right table manners, how he sort of would tilt his head when school photos were taken, the way he attempted to hit a baseball when playing as a kid, to even how loud he would breathe when on car rides where people would tell him to stop, in essence, breathing so loud. So on a daily basis, he got feedback from his narcissistic parents that he could do and be nothing right. And in essence, a condition for being the son to these two parents seemed to be that he agreed in their insistence of his basic wrongness as a person. So that's sort of this case example of James I want to kind of walk through this point with, about finding and connecting to cast off parts of oneself. And before I do that, I just want to quickly, remind folks about the online course on recovery for narcissistic abuse that's currently up on my website. You can click this card here to go there right now. And so here it quickly is. You can also find the website address for it in the description box below. I'm excited about it because, again, it focuses on three components of recovery: making sense of what happened, gaining distance from the narcissistic abusers, again, physically, psychologically, emotionally, and living in defiance of one's narcissistic abuser's rules for living. The feedback so far has been positive. If you're interested, I encourage you to check it out. Okay, so in the case of James, there's really a disreality to his situation. In the case of James's parents, they were kind of imposing a fiction, both in their own lives and upon James. The fiction that James was the sole source of problems in that family. In order for that fiction to kind of be imposed and in essence persisted, a lot of dislocation from oneself, both for James's parents and James, has to occur because that's what it takes to kind of insist on something that is in essence not supported by the brute facts of reality. In this case, James was not the bad, sort of deserving of criticism kid that he was being treated as. So there's a sort of disreality to what was being kind of claimed and imposed upon in the family, almost a drama, if you will. And there's a lot of pressure to go along with that drama. And the drama is another way of kind of capturing what the narcissistic psychology is, and what they often do to kind of keep themselves, in essence, afloat within. I wouldn't say keep themselves happy, because I don't think that's a real core piece of their experience. They have to sort of constantly jettison parts of their experience that they feel reflect their own sense of worthlessness. It's sort of a 24/7 job. And that jettisoning often needs to happen with another person, in this case, in this example, James being the recipient of that worthlessness. When the narcissistic parent, in this case's own sense of worthlessness, gets sort of relocated or jettisoned out of themselves and found in someone else, in this case, James as a scapegoat child, they get to kind of exercise this act of denial where they can insist that instead of being worthless, they're actually better than others. In this case, James's parents got to think of themselves as better than James, and that supported their very fragile sense of worth within themselves. So in this way, the behaviors that I described happening in James's family are in essence a ruse, or again, a drama or sort of a play. They're not derived from kind of fair observations of who James is and who his parents are. They are a means to an end. And that end is to keep the narcissistic parents' artificially inflated sense of self-worth, up, and to, again, relocate that creeping sense of worthlessness with them outside of themselves, and in this case, into James. So, for instance, when they were criticizing James for having the wrong table manners, that's not what the criticism was actually about. Instead, it was really about perceiving and treating James as the worthless one at the table, because that allowed them to see what they carried within them as being not a part of who they were, because they were unable to or couldn't bear to acknowledge that sense they carried around in themselves. And I think survivors of narcissistic abuse often have this sense that there's something else afoot when they're being devalued, derided, criticized in the way I've described James being in his history, that it's almost like, wait, why is this tape playing? Because it doesn't seem true, yet there's also a profound pressure to keep listening to the tape or watching the tape and going along with it. And that's the kind of pull or the drama that I think gets imposed in narcissistic abuse, particularly in a family like this. And so, although there's a felt artificiality to what's going on in the interactions with the other family members, where James is always the one to blame, going along with that false narrative still at that time can be better than doing otherwise. Because the child, James in this case, learns that he can either play according to these rules, that he's always the one who's wrong, or stand apart from them. And in that case, experience that dysphoric kind of groundlessness that is incredibly difficult to tolerate. In essence, to extricate yourself from the drama, even one that's bad and feels very hurtful and damaging, can just feel like being sort of nobody to no one. I've talked about this in prior videos. It's that experience of the kind of, again, that dysphoria, or that I am in a place where I don't know me, I'm not known by who I need to be known by, again, the parents, to have a sense of me, and therefore I gotta stay the heck away from not abiding by this drama, even if it means I'm always the bad guy. So that gnawing sense that something feels artificial, something maybe even deep down feels broken in the exchanges with the family. Not that brokenness may not occur all the time, but it can linger and kind of be there and fester. That sense for the survivor, for the person in James's position, often needs to be jettisoned itself, become something he has less contact with in order to kind of keep on going in the drama or the play of this narcissistic abuse that's being imposed. This psychoanalyst earlier in the 1900s named Harry Stack Sullivan, I think, had a great set of concepts to describe what a kid like James has to do and how he has to kind of compartmentalize himself to get through such treatment. In essence, Sullivan said that, we have three different aspects to our personalities. There's the good me, and these are the parts of ourselves that get reinforced with positive feedback by important other people in our lives. For James, his good me was pretty hard to come by in his family, but he did recall getting some approval for getting good grades in school, and both to some degree from his parents and from teachers. And then Sullivan called the bad me the part of the personality that gets negative reinforcement from important others. And so in good enough kind of parenting and a kid in that arrangement, to hit your sibling would probably be, oh, that's my bad me, or I'm acting in congruence with my bad me. I need to stop. That's not good. But in James's case, it was a lot encompassed his bad me. And that's common when cast into the role of scapegoat in a narcissistically abusive family. Later, as he kind of developed a sense of who he was, he had a way of perceiving a ton of flaws in himself, very much echoing the way his parents treated and reinforced this notion that all these ways of he's supposedly being are kind of his bad me, because so much of the way he was got negative feedback from his parents. But importantly, both the good me and the bad me, one can identify as part of me. That's part of who I am. There's a third component to the personality called the not me. And that's stuff that is so sort of threatening to one's relationships, to one's sense of oneself, that it's got to be experienced as foreign, as alien. And technically speaking, it's something we got to dissociate from, turn away from, make into something we're not, say, consciously aware of. Maybe it's just a sense or sensation in the body, but it has to be kept at bay. And for James, that consisted of all the accurate and therefore often good ways he might know himself. So he would feel extremely anxious in receiving an unexpected compliment from a peer, or friend, or partner. And that's just one example. And I wanted today, again, using this Sullivan's framework of talking about the process from the point of view of the person in recovery of coming into contact with this part of one's experience that was the not me, and working to place it into your eventual sense of yourself. It's a very important, I think, process of recovery, particularly if the narcissistic abuse you survived started early in life by one's parents. So, what's it like to come into contact with aspects of one's self that is part of this not me? Well, as mentioned before, like James would grow very anxious when receiving an unexpected compliment from people outside his family, in essence, receiving accurate feedback for who he was, because it didn't match how he knew himself. In this kind of good me, bad me way. It was part of his not me to be complimented for being, say, a kind or caring person or friend, for instance. And in James's recovery, he kind of, for a period of time, came to this sense that things were not working for him internally in the way they were set up. That in essence, he began to kind of question the kind of the organization, just the way things were set up in how he had to be in order to participate in that drama that his parents kind of lassoed him into. But this piece, or this part of recovery, was uncomfortable. To come to this sort of conclusion that, like, the way I experience myself, the way I know myself, is just not working, is profoundly uncomfortable. And in coming to this conclusion, it's not necessarily with a sense of there's an answer for how things can be different yet. And so it's that honest encountering of, like, the way things are right now internally don't work for me, and I don't know how they're going to, or if they're going to, but they don't work. There's again such a important honesty and, again, discomfort, dis-ease that comes with that. But what changes is that constant upkeep of kind of like maintaining the drama or the myth of, like, this is my good me, this is my bad me, I deserve this treatment from this narcissistically abusive parent. Not that it's stated that way, but that's kind of the logic of what's going on, and sort of saying, I give up, and there's no key to unlock that, in that state at the time. Like, I think, I don't know, one metaphor, because it's hard to kind of, I think, talk about this experience directly, but a metaphor for it is kind of recognizing that one is in a straitjacket, and that they've had to be in it for a long time, and that there's no key to unlock it in sight right now. And it feels very objectionable to be in it, but one knows one's in it. And that's important, an important passage, I believe, in this process of recovery. And I kind of want to tap into this notion of when one recognizes the unworkability of this scenario, that there may even be a sense of hopelessness. And as long as all of these feelings can sort of be tolerated and they don't feel, like they are, again, just intolerable, as one stays with that, and that staying with it can last, frankly, a long time, there can maybe eventually be sort of a creativity to this hopelessness, because it's sort of the seeds for change. Because what is and has been, again, hasn't been working, and that's getting recognized. And when faith is removed from this unworkable solution, things begin to kind of move around, where newness gets to come in. A lot of times folks will say it really just sucks to be in this position. And I think that's can be an accurate description of it, but it's also like a clean sucking, as it were, in that it's sort of the feelings and the experience that had to be, again, jettisoned when getting through what had to be gotten through as the survivor of narcissistic abuse. I think I like to understand this as kind of what the experience would have been, let's say, if James did participate in that drama. And now it's kind of like happening within oneself after having survived narcissistic abuse, in the sense of like stepping away from that drama, not knowing oneself in the way one was known in one's family. And as one gets to do that and see that this time they can survive with a lot of often discomfort initially, but they can still survive it, then something new gets to develop and change can happen and unfold, where eventually, as this sort of productive way of suffering continues and unfolds, then that drama that you had to kind of live with and through gets to be more clearly seen by the survivor. And as a result, it doesn't, interestingly and importantly, often breed a sense of resentment towards, say, one's narcissistic parents or abusers, but rather a sense of, hey, this has been living in me and I want it to change within me. And the question of like, were those parents right, or am I right, becomes a lot more muted. And what becomes more important and more loud inside is, how am I feeling? What do I need right now? Which is, again, a very, I think, important shift in recovering from narcissistic abuse. And there's simultaneously, I think, an increased craving for what feels real within the self and within one's life, as opposed to the contrivedness of the drama that one had to survive. And again, this is not an act of, I don't think, insight or solving a kind of psychological puzzle, but rather just of accepting feelings that have long felt unacceptable. The honest acknowledgement that life feels unworkable as currently construed, and the determination to stay with and live through those states. I'll talk more about it in future videos, but there's a book by Donald Epstein called The 12 Stages of Healing. And the first stage is called suffering, where there's a lot of what I'm describing today kind of corresponds to this, where it's sort of like how things are made right now isn't working, and period. And that's, again, and I think that he really lays it out well in this book, but that can be ultimately a very productive, again, but painful often, state to come to in this process. For James, this phase in his recovery kind of took the form of questioning kind of the ways he structured his life, because he would kind of go to work, do a ton of activities after, and kind of have nothing left when he got home, and kind of try to pack his weekends with activities in the same manner. And as he worked in therapy and with himself, he began to kind of gradually question those ways, because they seemed to kind of like keep his awareness in a very constricted range. And as he did that, it was very, very difficult. He went through a sense of kind of like, at times, meaninglessness, hopelessness, kind of almost confusion. Like, what do I do if I'm not packing, say from 5:30 p.m. till 11 p.m., myself with all these activities? It feels uncomfortable to just be kind of with myself. But he stuck with it. And with that, eventually came some of the understanding that I've been talking about today of how that sense of dis-ease, as it went from something being unwelcome to over time being first tolerated, then eventually welcomed, he got to kind of have a much bigger sense of himself that wasn't just about that good me and bad me, but incorporate a lot more aspects of this not me, or the old not me that he used to have to put too much of himself in. Well, I hope today's video was helpful just in terms of talking about some of the suffering in recovery that can be in some ways necessary and ultimately productive, as one tries to kind of turn towards oneself and stay in connection to oneself. That although it's unpleasant and beyond, right, at times, that it is, there is, I think, a part of our humanity that we get to feel more in touch with when we are kind of looking, eye to eye with what's bothering us inside. And over time, I think it can yield more sort of a healing sense or wholeness with oneself. Well, again, thank you everyone for your continued support of the channel. Look forward to posting again next Sunday, 9 a.m. Pacific time, and I hope you all have a good week.